ultimately the starting point was weddings. Weddings are a point in someone's life that was really defined. We could find people that were in that moment in their lives. They were prepared to spend money on preserving that moment, and already were dedicating budget to photographers and videographers. And there was a routine afterwards of revisiting that memory. We're marking the change in what is available technologically and how humans would ultimately have always wanted to re-experience the past.
It's about placing you back in the room. Like, we give you, it's like a time machine. You can travel back to your wedding and see details that you didn't see in the day. And what people really care about from our research is the peak moments, like, when you say I do, right? Or, and sometimes, dancing, right? The dance floor, or a speech, right? That you're like a loved one's giving a speech. You can't consume enough. They want to see every detail and they want to see everything. And we shine because when you're in a headset, you look around and you can do this, right? Whereas when you get the deliverable from the videographer or from the photographer, you just get the frame that they saw.
Truth away from home. Other connection feels so strange. People changing with every phase. Holding tight through space and time. Across dimensions, hearts align.
I'm MetaRick!
What? Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of MetaRick, where we explore the stories of builders leveraging emerging technologies like spatial computing and artificial intelligence to build companies and manage strategic programs. Today, we have an interesting story because I think it actually breaks out of the typical XR echo chamber. This is a problem when dealing with new technologies where we tend to attract a lot of early adopters and evangelists that get really excited about where the technology is going and what it could potentially accomplish. But sometimes we lose sight of what it's actually capable of today and how most people actually want to use it. This is one of those use cases that I think resonates with most people regardless of their interest in virtual reality, and could expose the technology to a whole lot of people who never would have considered wearing a headset at any point in their life. So today we've got two great guests. We've got Bob Matteson and Nick McEvily, the co-founder and advisor for a company called Relivable. And essentially what Relivable does is they capture 360 video to provide an immersive way for people to relive key moments, such as something like a wedding, where a bride and groom can come back and walk through that memory instead of looking at it on a video on a 2D screen or a laptop, maybe even share it with loved ones. So really excited to hear more about your guys' story and what you're working on. I think to get started, Bob, I saw that you've got a long background working in sales and then some angel investment, and you founded something else before this. Maybe you could talk us through a little bit of the history of your career and how you ended up falling into XR and starting Relivable.
Yeah, cool. Super excited to be here. So I've been lucky enough to play startup for most of my career. And that's been about 17 years doing kind of the startup thing. And my first entry into it was starting the coupon company, Groupon. I was the sales guy that got all the deals. And when I was working on it, I was the only person full time because it was, a part of another company. It was just this side project. Doing that for 2 years, kind of seeing the growth we had, how many people we were hiring, and just how many people were using it got me excited. I moved to the West Coast, and that's where I decided I wanted to make this my career. And what I learned when I got out to Silicon Valley was, this is cool. I love creating things. Number two, I got so much learning to do. All these people around me are such a big head start. So I worked for some, we'll call real entrepreneurs out there, and, started to learn and work hard and figure out, how can I make the transition from being kind of the employee to being the founder. That took me a long time. So 2013, I started my first company, but I fought it for about a year and a half, mainly because I just didn't think I had the courage to jump in and be the person, right? It's different when you're an employee, right? Yeah, even an early employee where you're wearing a lot of hats and doing a lot of things. And so in 2013, I officially started my last company, which was in real estate technology. And so we worked with large apartment buildings and made it easier for residents to talk to the property, right? And I ran that company for 8 years, grew it to work with a lot of big institutional property managers. We had a lot of users around the country. And then we sold to a large private equity firm in 2021. That experience of starting it at my kitchen table all the way to the closing call where the lawyers sort of release the signatures, right, and make it official, taught me everything, right? And I got to kind of experience a few highs and a lot of lows and a lot of very lows. So that was a ton of fun to do that. And after I sold the company, I told myself I needed to sort of unwind. I needed to reflect, needed some break. And then I realized I wanted to operate again, which is where Relivable came.
Yeah, that didn't last long.
I think
Not as long as maybe I in hindsight should have, but it was there was some break. There was some break. My break was I had 3 kids and I went to business school. And then at some point I realized I needed to start to do something again.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of founders through the show and like through my personal network and stuff. And this is such a common thing where I feel like once you successfully exit or you shut down and don't have a successful exit, but you kind of finish up with one project, it's pretty hard not to go back and start another thing. It's pretty rare that I found someone who just totally stops building. I think there's like a gift and a curse to it, but there's this constant need to solve problems and want to operate and run something. There's like this fulfillment in it. And there's all sorts of crazy stories of people staying in the same industry and just doing it again or completely pivoting to something totally different. And it seems like in this case, it's kind of a pretty big pivot, right? Like helping a real estate industry with more of a traditional kind of SaaS or traditional technology is so different than something like XR or immersive. And, I feel like this is still a relatively niche technology. So how did you first discover VR and what kind of sparked you to start Relivable?
Yeah, I'd say, well, there's 2 things here. I think when I realized I wanted to operate again, and I didn't want to kind of shift into a different role, being kind of different stakeholder in the startup ecosystem, I had 2 criteria. And the first is I had to absolutely love whatever it was, right? I had to really want it because to see something from start to finish requires just an exceptional amount of determination. And if you don't love it, it's hard to be determined during the hard times. And the reality is it's just hard, right? There's some good times, but most of it is just hard. And so that was number 1. And number 2 is I had to feel like we were solving a universal problem. And this will connect to Relivable in a second. I had to feel like it was something that was in all of us, right? And for me, I had started to have some kids and started to take more photos and videos than I had ever before. Seemed like I was constantly reaching for my phone to take a picture of my kids. And I started to think wow, how are we looking back at these moments, right? This picture is just a nice visual prompt of something that happened, right? First steps, whatever, Sunday morning, right? First time eating, pick it. There's all these different things that start happening with kids. And they're great. And I love pictures. I love the videos I have. But is it really allowing me to connect with that specific memory? And so that started me pulling the thread to wonder, how am I sharing with my kids the things I've done in my life? And how are they going to share with their kids? And so on and so on. Because memories are core to our identity. And oftentimes their stories is how they're passed on from generations, which is great, right? And the better storyteller you are, the more context you can set and really paint a picture. But why not use technology, right? And very specifically, I, Chicagoan Cubs fan, grew up next to Wrigley Field, and I was lucky enough to go to one of the World Series games in 2016. The last time they were in the World Series was in 1945, and my grandfather was at one of the games. Never got to talk to him about it. Never, like, only heard stories through my mom. And then it made me realize, like, I went to the World Series, he went to the World Series. We never talked about it. We didn't share that, that we had that shared experience. And what do I have to show my kids, right? When they're old enough for me to tell them about the Cubs and how much I love them. So that really was a catalyst of, I've done a lot of things in my life that I want to be able to share with my kids. And maybe there's a different form, right? A different media form to share this with, share this for ourselves, loved ones, and with kids, future generations.
So, something about your story that's already standing out to me that I really appreciate is that it starts with this moment of like a real like thing in your life that maybe it's a problem, maybe it's just something you want to be better, right? Like this idea of passing on a memory or sharing a moment that's already happened with your kid or with someone else. Like I love that there's those two sides of it, of like thinking about what you missed out on with your parent and what you could give to your kid. I think that's really interesting. Maybe you could help me connect the dots on how you end up discovering immersive tech, though, because I feel like what's interesting about this is a lot of people that I've talked to that start these companies, they have like a moment where they try like the 360 video of like a Google Cardboard and they see where it could go, or they try the Oculus DK1 and they start developing for it, or maybe they played video games their whole life and then they start designing 3D worlds, right? Like those are the traditional ways I tend to see people start companies in the space. But you seem a little different. It seems like you have this really genuine want to just improve memories, and you see it as like a new medium of how to present those memories and content. And I think that's really fascinating. So I wonder, did you research and just kind of look up online? Did you meet anyone that shared this with you, or how'd you connect the dot of the solution to the problem?
Yeah, no, I sort of will answer it a little bit. Then I will also kind of introduce Nick here, because I think Nick will be a good person to speak on that. I think a lot of times what, kind of gives me confidence is thinking about the future and what that looks like and having an opinion on it. And my last company, my co-founder and I looked at each other and we're like, this is just going to happen in the future, right? This is how the world's going to, this is how they're going to do it, right? Why not us, right? And when I came up on what is Relivable today, I thought this is what we're going to do in the future, right? We see this in movies, right? And that make the future out to look like this. And so when I started sort of saying that again, I felt like maybe there was like some confidence building in me that, okay, like you should try to do this, right? Not to say I think we are hopefully going to do this, but like, at least to try, right? Like we can go and do this. Nick and I were introduced through a mutual friend in Chicago. And when I started, and just as you observed, right? Like the starting off point was around memories. It wasn't immersive tech. And Nick and I started to sort of form a bond over how we're sentimental about some of the things that have happened in life and that will happen, and how we can use and what role technology can play in, making it easier for us to recall those important memories. And so we started to research, and, Nick had kind of a design studio in Chicago that worked with entrepreneurs to help them research ideas they had. And for me, it was kind of a no-brainer to work with smart people and decide like one of two things would happen, right? I'd fall out of love with this idea around memories and find reasons not to do it, or I'd continue to be more in love with it. And so we started to work, and I'll kick it over to Nick to kind of share his stuff, and he can kind of talk a little bit about how we approach the research, and then I can kind of pick up from what he shares.
Yeah, I remember we were considering NFTs in the early days, Bob. You remember that? We were like, what if we could mint something on the blockchain to, make it official that an experience had happened? So we were exploring all sorts of ways of, using technology. Immersive wasn't the first and only. I think what it came down to in terms of surfacing the relevance of immersing technology was when we split the idea into two parts. It was the part of capturing the memory and the part of watching or looking at the memory. Of course, there's storage of the memory in between, but that was boring. So we just really focused on those two parts. And the first part was interesting. It's like, okay, well, what's the best way to capture a memory or a moment? And so we went into these different, paths down into capturing. And that was, how do you look at this thing in a better way? Is it higher definition? Is it in a sequence with music over it? Like, how does emotion start to play into the viewing of an image? And so we started to really get fascinated by each of these different pathways, and both of them ended up leading us to the newest technology in both of those fields, which was 360 video capture in the capture angle, and VR stuff, VR headsets mainly in the immersive kind of reviewing of information. And so that's when we started to think, okay, there's technology here that can improve both of these experiences, but how do we implement that? Like, where do we start? I remember very, very early on, Bob and I realized how big this idea could become and how it could be like a whole entire entertainment platform and something that was maybe loaded onto headsets, and like, it just has so much in terms of a brand to capitalize on, but we weren't really sure where to start with it. And so I'm excited for Bob to share kind of the starting point, the progress we've made since we discovered the starting point. But ultimately the starting point was weddings. Weddings are a point in someone's life that was really defined. We could find people that were in that moment in their lives. They were prepared to spend money on preserving that moment, and already were dedicating budget to photographers and videographers. And there was a routine afterwards of revisiting that memory. And we found it was like the most frequent and most emotional compared to like graduation maybe, or other moments, birthdays. You don't go back to every birthday all the time. So we weren't looking at kind of like the long tail of events. We were looking at like big events that were really important to folks, and weddings was the perfect place for us to start. And so, Bob has been spending the last, year or so building a business in the wedding industry. And he and I hold tension. I'm like, man, but we can't serve the wedding industry too much because we have this big idea that we need to be working towards. And he's like, yeah, but we have these customers that we have to solve for now. And so there's a good story to be shared around why that's the best starting point and how that's been going.
It's really interesting. You guys start with weddings because, I come from the film industry. I was a film student. I was an actor for a long time. I have a lot of friends that are still in that industry. And, we've had a lot of debates about the role of AI in the entertainment industry and in filmmaking and, 3D gaming and design. And if avatars get lifelike enough and they can be operated by AI that's also lifelike enough, then what's the role of an actor? Are they even needed anymore? Or can a director and a writer run an entire scene without any actors and just be able to recreate these kind of digital humans that are capable of retelling that story the way they want it to and doing infinite takes and all these great things? And the examples that I always use as counterpoints to what's not going to get replaced by AI and 3D design is human documentation. So the first example I always go back to is weddings. And the second is like a corporate talking head of an executive that's like, you want to hear from the actual person. That's why it matters. But what's interesting about this is if it gets lifelike enough to where you can scan the space and retell the moment, like maybe you do replace videographers with scans of that environment or 360 videos. Like, you're kind of making me rethink that analogy as
there's
we
an
talk
ethical
about it.
component to that decision, I feel like. But yeah, I agree. And what you're talking about and referencing really are moments, maybe not memories. And what you also hit on in the overlap in our experience so far is that movies and storylines and stories are super important. And so we've recognized that in our research that what we're trying to do is build memories. And the difference between a memory and a moment is the story and where it lives in the story. And can you see this thing from start to finish and feel the moment again? It's not like the moment of, Larissa putting her first, piece of food in her mouth when she's a baby. It's seeing her eyes glow afterwards, and you looking next to you to your wife or partner and seeing their face and the excitement, and then you're really in the moment. You have that you have that motion, you have that freedom, which is different than what we have all been used to for the last 1,000 years. So this really does feel like we're marking with this company, we're marking the change in what is available technologically and how humans would ultimately have always wanted to re-experience the past. And we're just inching forward. We're just inching forward with it. And we just have this one moment that we're looking to engineer around. But I think that level of detail is super necessary. And Bob's been doing a beautiful job of obsessing over that moment and that memory for folks.
So let's talk about the first one, because I think I love the exploration process you guys went on. I think this is like really good business building. It shows both of your experience as a product builder, as a founder. Like, you guys really understand you want to start with solving for something, you want to do your research. I love that you explored a variety of different solutions and technologies that tie into this. But when you find this sweet spot, right, like weddings, you discover like this is a moment that people always are capturing. There's kind of a pipeline for it. There's a business to build here. What's the MVP? What's like the first memory capture of an event that you guys did for a wedding?
Yeah, no, good question. I think as we shifted towards weddings, like at that point, like the first wedding we did, we were still thinking events too. We were like, oh, we can kind of film everything. And then I thought, well, we really need to be very specific of where we're going, because the vast majority of people have no understanding about VR. They've never put a headset on. And if they have, those are usually like not always the best experiences, right? And so when we figure out how we talk to customers, talk about the value proposition, like we need to really, really understand it. And the first wedding we did, we didn't know where to put the cameras. We didn't know that we'd run into like battery issues, right? We had like one camera that was the size of a soccer ball. We had the other one that was like tiny, right? Using a screen, like, and so we really were, kind of blind leading the blind. But the beginner's mindset, right, that we have, I think also gives us like that's an area of like, we didn't really know what we were doing, is sort of like, okay, we're not experts in these cameras, right? So we need to become experts in these cameras. So we found people and hired people. The first event, we didn't download the footage the right way off of some cameras. And then we shot over the SD card. So some of the footage was lost.
I've done that on film sets before. It's the worst feeling in the world.
Yeah. Some of it was right, but some of it was wrong. And so I think there's just been like a lot of on the job training, and I think that's normal. I learned that way. I'm a learn by doer. A lot of us are. Two, there's not really like experts in this, right? This isn't a field that has like a huge amount of experts of filming in 360 and producing immersive experiences that get watched a lot, right? I think now you can go to like Meta TV and you can see some really cool stuff. But that's not even, people haven't even been doing that for very long, right?
So this is actually like, is this the two of you then taking these cameras on site, doing the whole production yourselves?
I was there. It was somebody I knew, so I was also there as a guest. And then we found a couple of other local photographers to kind of help out in film. So it was just like, who can we find?
I had my own experiment actually with my wedding. So I got married a year and a half ago and brought an Insta360 and a GoPro Max 360 to my wedding, and gave them to people, or like, gave them some instructions, loose instructions. One, the GoPro Max doesn't automatically start recording in 360. So all the footage I captured on that thing was basically 2D. And then I lost the Insta360 camera, or it got stolen by the end of the night. And so
Oh,
I unfortunately, in trying to recreate my wedding, I was actually, I tried to ask my wife if I could wear the glasses you're wearing right now, Ricky,
oh, the better Ray-Bans. Yeah.
yeah. And she was like, I'm not marrying you in those. Because I have like the thick ones. I look like a total nerd in them, but I mean, they look great on you, but I wasn't pulling them out. She was
Well,
like, I'm sorry,
it's
we're
funny you bring that
canceling
up.
that.
Like some of the early couples that we talked to, the questions were like, "Are you asking me to wear a headset while I'm getting married?"
Oh, that's interesting.
It's like that question is asked, or some form of that question is asked more often than you would think, right? Because people really are confused. Like, okay, like, well, how do you do this? I mean, even yesterday I was talking to somebody who in the business world, like even he was like, wait, so how do you even start to do this, right? Like, I think the knowledge of 360 cameras is limited. The understanding of like VR and how it works is certainly very limited, and understandably so, right? It's not mainstream yet, so you have to sort of seek it out to learn about it. And but one of the things that as we started to do this, we needed to reach out to the network of the film community, right? And find the person who films using these types of cameras or are interested in learning how to do that. But they also have to like be willing to work at a wedding, right? And understand how to work at a wedding, because that's also important, right? And we've kind of developed these learnings, right? And we've kind of started to figure like, how do we get into the market? How do we address some of these questions of, do I wear a headset, right? Well, I get married, so that, we can maybe work towards explaining the value proposition, right? Because what we hear from our customers is, why doesn't everybody do this? Like, I watch this every day for 3 weeks and I got to see new details every time, right? Like, and like, and it's like, is this like shooting fish in a barrel, right? Doesn't everybody want to, have this for their wedding, right? That's the sort of sentiment that we hear from our customers, after we deliver the content for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. VR technology in general, like regardless of use case, this is pretty consistent across the board, where it's really high friction, really high value. So even like I work with a lot of enterprise companies to do VR collaboration, where they hop into a meeting room together and they share ideas and can communicate with 3D space. And what's interesting is it's like the first 3 meetings are not going to be very productive most of the time. And we have to accept that and kind of lean into it. It's like, there's a value to human connection. There's a value to the playfulness. Like there's other things that we can lean into in those first 2 or 3 meetings. But once you get past the first 2 or 3, people calm down a little bit. They get over the fact that wearing a headset's a little silly. They get over the fact that it's like, oh my God, wow, I've never experienced anything like this. They get over the fact that they're learning how to do basic things like move around and grab something that they've done their whole lives. And then they can start to be productive. They can start to get stuff out of it. They start to notice things. It starts to be really, really valuable. And the people that stick with it outperform their peers drastically, whether that's onboarding and ramping up faster in training or doing 3D design work and prototyping or whatever it is, in the enterprise cases. But for the consumer, I feel like it's the same way, right? It's like there's all these questions and uncertainty and like they don't understand what it is. And then once they feel it, once they go back and they re-experience that memory, like I imagine that would hook most people pretty quickly once they actually have a chance to experience it themselves.
Yeah.
So how do you go about that? Do you
Yeah.
have like demos or like a sample wedding or something like that you show people, or how do you get people over that hump?
Any ideas?
Well, actually, yeah,
ears.
we could riff on some ideas around that, but I'm curious.
Yeah. So, I'll tell you, start with a quick story, and then I'll kind of go into some of the ways of like how we're, messaging, right, to customers. We did a wedding last month in New York area, and the couple, right, who, we worked with, decided a couple months before their wedding that they had to have VR for their wedding. They needed to film it for VR because the bride's brother had done this for his wedding. And what she shared with us is that when he decided to do this, we sort of gave him a hard time, right? He's the tech guy. Of course, he's going to do this. And then as soon as they saw the output, as soon as they put the headset on, they switched from let's give them a hard time to we need that for ourselves, right? And that's awesome. I think it's to your point is like once you experience it and once you see it, and she shared that it's like kind of the party trick, right? When she goes over to his brother's house, like, and there's like other people who haven't seen it, it's let's pull it out, right? Let's go see the wedding. And what that tells us is like this is having a huge impact, right? When you like once you put it on, you get it. And having put on the headset now, probably demoed 500 people, right? There's usually this immediate take it off. Okay, I get it now. And those people are, either a lot of these people I've demoed, I had talked to prior on the phone or virtually or something. And, and they give me this is interesting, that's great, but they really like, I don't know how much they get, right? And then we do it, I give them a demo and they take it off and they say, okay, wow, I get it. Like I was just at someone's wedding, right? And so as we think about how we communicate the value proposition, because when delivered right, it's priceless. To see loved ones the way they were on an event as important as your wedding, right, is it's tremendous. It's priceless. It's like the old Discover commercials, right?
Yeah. Well, and I imagine even for like a family member who can't go to the wedding, right? Like I remember one of the best weddings I've ever been to. One of my really close friends, his co-founder of a company he started couldn't go to the wedding because he had a funeral, and he couldn't miss the funeral. It was like he had to be there. He had to prioritize, and it was really unfortunate because it was like they're worked together building a company for like 7-8 years. Like they're very close. And missing that experience and not being able to be at his co-founder's wedding, his best friend's wedding, like that sucks. Like he really missed out on that, and he wished that he could be there. And I could feel it when I talked to him afterwards.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is another value proposition for you guys is in that scenario, if he could put a headset on and get to at least tap into what it was like and see the moments that the rest of us got to experience and get a little bit closer, I feel like for the rest of their lives, they'd be able to share that moment better than they are right now without that.
Yeah,
absolutely. You're tapping into the another whole chapter, I feel like, of the company where people are sharing memories, not that they've experienced themselves. That's the reason why people are buying the product now, is that I want to save my own memory and re-experience myself. That's the main use case. But the idea of having an experience and sharing with someone else is incredible, right? Like the honeymoon that, only some of that you want to share. But there's so many more moments in your life that, like, I think there's a socialization component that we haven't even really uncovered quite yet. There's a marketplace. Like, what if you could experience something that a famous person is experiencing? Would that person be able to sell that memory to their fans, because the fans are so enthralled with their lives? And it's like, so there's so much that could unfold, I think, in front of us here. And we've only just begun to really understand the most important and intimate portion of this, which is self-preservation of mind.
Well, and there's, I mean, I think it's kind of getting into like our business is two things, right? We're a service where we are for hire to go to your wedding and film it, right? And, there's a high cost to that, right? These are not inexpensive cameras. You have to pay people who are experienced to be there, and then you need to edit it. Not to mention these are really large files, right? We captured, I think, close to 5 terabytes of data at the last weekend wedding or one of the weekend's weddings we were at. The other side of what we're doing is building a platform, and it's access. It's like, I'm triggered. I want to go and find this memory. And this is where I have, like something that I would consider a good representation of the story that Nick touched on earlier. And we're building out the platform right now. And this is our long-term, what we are really interested in is how do people use the immersive experience for themselves, just as Nick brought up, right? To go back on something important for them. How are they sharing it with other people? right? For them to see their lives, right? But then how are they interacting, right? Because memories are extremely social. Like the amount of photos shared on WhatsApp every day, right, is incredible, because people share a picture and that's part of their story, right? Look, this happened, I ran into it, right? And they're small stories, right? They're short. These are like important stories, important memories, and how are you interacting around them? And so, whether that's just simply sending it to someone who can go into a headset and watch it for themselves, which is somewhat isolating when you have a headset on. But the other thing is like, when do we introduce sort of the quote multiplayer mode, right? Where, Bob, Ricky, and Nick are all watching the same thing together and we're talking about it, right? Just in my WhatsApp example, that's the future way of me sending a short little video to a friend on WhatsApp and typing a message, right? Soon we can jump into a headset and all talk about whatever that is, right?
Did you guys follow the update with Hyperscape from MetaConnect? Do you guys know what that is?
No.
So at MetaConnect, they announced so many things in the keynote, and I think this got overshadowed by Orion glasses and like a handful of things that were very, very up there on the excitement and hype factor.
Mm-hmm.
But Hyperscape, I think, is one of the coolest things they shared, and it's not talked about quite as much, which is these high fidelity, photorealistic, real life spaces. So being able to jump in the same studio that Green Day recorded their music, for example, or auto garage for like a Formula One car, like being able to go into these spaces and essentially teleport yourself there is a really interesting use case. And hearing you kind of paint the picture of where this could go, like, not to go too speculative with it, but I feel like you hit two very interesting things. One is essentially time travel. It's a recreation of a moment. It's not actually going back to it. Like it is still simulated. It's still a recording. It's like set. It's not something you can change or alter. But you are essentially able to walk into the past with someone and kind of essentially time travel backwards, which I think is very interesting. With AI, you could potentially even simulate future possibilities. So there's something interesting there. But then on the other side, it's like real-time teleportation. Like being able to recreate an environment, even if it's not a memory. Can I teleport to your room from across the world and hang out with you? So there's a lot of interesting things there. I think it comes back to what Nick was talking about at the beginning, which is like you have these two things. There's the capturing of moments and the distribution of moments. And so that's where, for me, just kind of hearing the story for the first time, I start to see your future here is like as something much bigger than weddings. Is if you just keep perfecting the capturing of moments and the distribution of moments, there's pretty endless possibilities to what you can capture and distribute. But as a business, obviously you have to balance that with revenue and the people that feel the pain the most and are most willing to pay for it so that you can keep growing and keep getting to those things, right?
Yeah, there's I don't know, it's funny how like when you teach, like we're a business, we're trying to, we're certainly like for hire and we want to generate revenue. But also like we think that the future, there's going to be so many more use cases that'll be just a little bit more accessible, right? Which is why we invest in the platform. I think investors are generally like sort of unoriginal, right? And it's what's the market size, right? Weddings and this and that, shrinks and all that. But what you just said is, you introduced a use case of somebody like going halfway around the world to hang out with somebody in this like sort of real life way. You're like something absolutely incredible, right? To get there, we need to start somewhere where they're actually using this, right? And we need to like start in a more like obtainable and accessible and a repeatable type of use case, which is why we think weddings are perfect, because we deliver so much value. And there's so many people that you interact with around your wedding, right? Which means that you can create these like interactions with people post-wedding around this immersive content. That's super interesting, right? How 2D content plays with 3D content is something that's super interesting to us as well, right? Because every wedding has 200 photographers, right? Everybody's taking their own pictures, right? And like, can you balance that, right? Can you balance the photos that your guests take with this other form of content?
There's also the limitations of like market factors, right? Like you don't have control over all the variables. Like we keep talking about headsets getting better. None of us have control over that, right? It's like hardware is very difficult to disrupt, and there's a few companies spending billions and billions of dollars trying to get it right. And the hope is that they'll keep getting it better and better, and things like Orion will become more accessible. So we kind of have to work within the confines of what technology is available to us and what the market limitations are. I had this guy Josh from Mace Virtual Labs on recently, and he works with kind of consulting with companies to scale out hardware and help them get programs off the ground, kind of the infrastructure around it. And he had this great line where he's like, you can't build Uber until there's a smartphone in every pocket. That business can't exist until it's ubiquitous and
mass adoption.
Everyone can pull it out.
Not just that it exists, but it's mass adoption.
And so a lot of the use cases we just kind of riffed on, you can't do today because not enough people have headsets, but the wedding use case you totally can do because it's people are investing in this big moment and this big memory. What's $500 or even $300 now for like a Meta Quest 3 or Quest 3S to get access to this infinite memory, right? That's much more accessible. So let's kind of dig back down into that, right? So this is where you are today is you're really focused on this use case. You've seen success with it. You're starting to kind of hit this market fit. Talk me through the sales cycle. Like where are you finding your customers? Like what's the main source of these leads? And like what's a typical sales cycle look like from kind of first interaction?
All really good questions. And I think like the way I would sort of come into that question is like we're not really changing consumer spending behavior, right? Like people at weddings, people who plan weddings spend a lot of money on documenting the day or the weekend or the entire journey, right? You know, engagement photos. And so we're just a different, you know, sort of way to do that. And that difference is, you know, it goes against what's like sort of commonly accepted. Everybody gets a photographer. Half of the people get videographers, maybe a little bit more. And what I'm seeing is that more people are kind of trending away from traditional videography because it's a curated story. And they seek out, there's what's called content creators at weddings, which, you know.
Like TikToker type folks?
Exactly. Take photos on iPhones, and they're really good at putting up Instagram reels and giving you like a whole folder, like probably 1,000 photos, right, of behind the scenes stuff, right? Stuff you missed, right? That authentic, let me capture like my guests having fun.
Is there a good, sorry to cut you off, but is there a good UGC mechanism? Like do these, like I know there's some platforms for how people manage their weddings and stuff, and everyone's like taking photos and videos from the family and stuff too. Is there a good mechanism already for them to intake that, or is that something they kind of have to handle on their own?
Everybody
outside of hashtags, yes. They still got the classic hashtag.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think people come up with hashtags. Honestly, like photo albums in shared photo albums in iPhones, right? So if you have an Android, right, you're sort of not included. There are some companies that have been designed around like, here's a QR code and you can upload it to a file. I think the hard part with that is like, it's like how much like the willingness to pay, right? Like how much can they really invest in creating a really, really good product, right? Because you'd have to do so many weddings in order to generate enough revenue to keep putting.
Yeah, I feel like it would need to be a feature of like
not a platform, it's a feature.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a feature we're curious about, right? And we're sort of building in a lot around guests because guests are a huge component of your wedding. And, you know, your couple cares so much about the guests and how they're experiencing the wedding. And it's like feasting on breadcrumbs, according to, you know, couples, right? That's their word, their term, to know what their guests did at their wedding. But there's some sort of stats of like people are kind of starting to kind of be really interested, and that's becoming sort of a go-to thing is I want a content creator because I'll get a ton of that photos. And just right before this was talking to a wedding planner who's telling me that like her team would start an album, do a ton of behind the scenes things. And so on the flight to the honeymoon, right, they can just look at all the photos that they took, right? Because generally speaking, couples can't consume enough right after their wedding, right? They're on a high and they want to stay high and they want to keep looking through all the photos and stuff and swiping through it. So as we go into the market, we're sort of fighting against like those traditional ways. And very quickly, people will sort of think that we're videography. And I think we even started to use sort of language that suggested we were similar to it. And after, I don't know, 3 or 4 months of meeting with different planners and couples and stuff like that, we started realizing like, this is not like a traditional video, right? And so the only thing that mirrors a traditional videographer is that we have people there filming, right? Everything else about what you get from us, right, is different. And it's about placing you back in the room, right? Like, we give you, it's like a time machine. You said it, right? And we use that language, right, to say you can travel back to your wedding and see details that you didn't see in the day. And what people really care about from our research is the peak moments, like, when you say I do, right? Or, and sometimes, dancing, right? Dance floor, or a speech, right? That you're like a loved one's giving a speech. You can't consume enough. They want to see every detail and they want to see everything. And we shine because when you're in a headset, you look around and you can do this, right? Whereas when you get the deliverable from the videographer or from the photographer, you just get the frame that they saw, right? Or the videographer chose to use this sort of footage.
How much editing goes into the process? Like, is it basically just here's a full recording that you can then kind of skip through and kind of experience on your own time, or do you guys kind of highlight key moments throughout and deliver them kind of a curated deliverable?
Well, we're still learning. So I don't want to say whatever I say is not like we're experts, like we think we know everything. But we do a little bit of both. A lot of the editing is just like managing the file size and then adjusting the point of view, right? So we have you looking where we want you to look. And so that, because it's very disorienting when you go into a virtual experience and you're like, the main event is over here and you're looking that way, right? Very disorienting. And so that's where a lot of the like editing goes, is to making it consumable, not as much trying to tell you a story, right? It's about putting you back into the story.
Yeah, giving you a comfortable experience. Because I imagine it's a pretty passive experience, right? Like people aren't necessarily like moving around the space and grabbing things. They're just kind of standing back in that environment and getting to look around and kind of experience it, right?
Yeah, I think over time the movement will get better to not make you as like nauseous. But like if you move too much, right, somebody might be a little nauseous. But we want the couples we work with to have the longer form for like, if you want it, here's the whole ceremony, right? But also, let me give you a highlight reel and these like other things that are going to be great. And over time, we'll get better and better about just giving more control over how and what you see, right, to the user. As we build out our platform.
And again, like I'm just fascinated by this business. So like I hope I'm not like overstepping with ideas. Like I hope some of this is interesting to you guys and to the audience. But
I'm good until about 5:30 or 6. I gotta start doing some kid stuff. No.
No, we got just a few minutes here and we'll wrap up. But I'm so fascinated by this. Like I know you've got this big picture idea and I'm really interested in that too. But just in the wedding business, if you kept leaning into this, there's so many things this could be used for. Because I'm starting to think about, if you're mastering how to work with a wedding and capture the story of a wedding, those 360 videos aren't just valuable for reliving the memory. It's also really valuable to give to like wedding planning agencies and teaching them, when new hires, like this is what a wedding looks like. Go live through 20 weddings really quickly in one day or 1 week, and then come to us with 3 months of experience within your first week on the job, right? Like that's a really interesting use case. Or I was pitching a massive hotel chain on 3D immersion a couple of years ago, and they were focused on Indian weddings specifically because they tend to be 6-figure, big budget endeavors. And they wanted to create digital twins that are essentially kind of like a car configurator, where you can change the colors and open the door and swap the tires out, but with wedding decorations and like how they set up the venue for their wedding. So like if you guys really just sat in like immersive weddings and events, like there's a lot of directions you could take this. I don't know if that's necessarily what you want to do, but
You're
it's just
fighting me.
something I'm
You're fighting me
seeing.
on this, Ricky. I'm on the other side of this argument.
Is this a discussion you
I
guys are
agree.
having pretty
There's-
regularly? I
agree.
imagine it's got to be, right?
I
There's no
agree
prejudice.
with what you're saying. I just, we can't cut off our nose to spite our face. Like this is a billion-dollar industry, new industry. It's a new Netflix app to go back on the movies from your life, to share with multiple generations, 100-year subscriptions, not 1-year subscriptions. Like it's a whole different thing. And if we talk about making sure an employee at a wedding venue is trained better, are we creating a billion-dollar industry? Are we changing the way we all live? No, someone else is on training videos. Someone else is on venue, digital twins, in my opinion. But I'll let Bob represent his
these are really difficult startup choices to make, right? Like these are inflection points, but it's interesting that you guys are already, of course, you're already talking about this.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, there's no part of us that isn't like fully immersed in the wedding space.
Definitely missed my mouth there.
So this is, there's so much room for us to sort of run here, and we're already in motion with venues and with planners, not yet live, but going to use our stuff to show couples what it's like to work with them in terms of how great of the event they pull off for. But also interesting use cases is during the planning phase, right? Like I can't visualize what the dance floor is going to look like. And so it's like, here, let me show you some other things that we've done, right? So that the couple feels like comfortable, right? And alleviate that anxiety, because there's so much anxiety around the planning of your wedding day, right? So the use cases really are endless, which goes into some of the sort of ways we're going to market, right? Is through the planners and through the wedding venues, and using the wedding venue is almost a way to demo our product, right? Do some of the selling for us. And it's a really interesting use case. It's actually something that we are trying to get to the right people and get noticed by Meta, because Orion is a great use case. I mean, imagine some, really, incredible wedding venue having a pair of glasses in their pocket, right? And saying, hey, this is the empty space. Hard to imagine that this turns into this amazing wedding venue, right? And then that person pops on, glasses, right? Like, I think that's what Meta wants, right? That's what they want to enable. And so we think we're uniquely positioned to sort of provide some really interesting learnings for them. So,
yeah, I think the approach to working with event venues and planners makes a ton of sense to me. This is I'm just tying in a lot of patterns I'm seeing with the enterprise tools that I work with, where it's really common that there's an existing workflow, an existing purchasing process for like a learning SaaS tool, or for an HR onboarding program, or whatever it is. Like there tends to be some sort of program that sort of aligns, and this is just a new medium to do the same activities they're already doing. But there's other companies, there's agencies consulting on those things. Like there's other groups that are kind of earlier in the value chain before VR becomes a part of the conversation. And so in weddings, I imagine they get the event planner pretty quickly. Like that's probably one of the first decisions they're making. Venue, similarly, they get booked out so far in advance that's probably one of their first decisions. So I feel like if you can tap into those early decisions that people are making, you have a way better shot at getting in front of these people than just like bidding on Google AdWords or social ads or these kind of other strategies.
Yeah. I mean, like, again, when you're bringing something new to the space, like how are you going to get the customer, right? And you have to be so much more original than Google AdWords. And, it's because it does come down to like cost per acquisition of a customer, right? And what are they worth, right? Like there are some key ratios, key metrics that, that matter, right?
Are you willing to share any of those, by the way? It's totally cool if you're not, but I am curious if there's like a typical cost, like what someone would have to pay to accomplish something like this for their wedding, or if you have like packages that you do or something.
Yeah, a lot of it's packaged. It's definitely a more expensive product. right?
As it should be, right? It's a
Yeah,
higher value product too.
exactly. I mean, I think, when we work with a couple for the day, we would make anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000. If we're going to do a whole weekend with someone, it goes up from there, right? It can be as much as $25,000 if we're on site for 48 hours, right? You got to have people there manning the cameras, and the more content we capture, which is more valuable to them, the more editing we got to do, right?
Yeah. That's
I,
actually not too bad. That's
yeah.
like not that much more expensive than traditional videography for a wedding. Like I know a lot of people that like I spent years in the photo and video space, and like I know a lot of wedding photographers and videographers that charge $5,000 a day that have been doing it a long time. So like it seems like you guys are actually kind of right in line with the budget that I would expect people to be willing to pay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where we want to be, right? We're not trying to tell them like come up with like $50,000 and all that and whatnot. But we still also we're we're really like trying to deliver a lot to our customers because there's a lot that happens in your weekend. I think I talked about there's this peak moments, but then we really shine in intimate moments as well. And those intimate moments, where it could be like a first look, or it could just be like after getting married in a room where you're just sort of like unwinding for a minute, right? Or like one-to-one speeches is really just a cool way to connect with people the way they were, right? It's like my mom and her at what age she was when I got married versus like 20 years later. It's going to be life happens fast, and being able to kind of connect with a person at that time is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Over time things get less expensive, right? There's like when technology is like scarce, it's really, really expensive, right? When it's abundant, it gets a lot more commoditized. And
Sorry,
so
Nick, I do want to let you talk, but I have one little question. It's a tiny little thing. Do people tend to buy their VR headset separately, or do you bundle that in
we
as
bundle
something
it
to
in.
just make it
At
easy?
first we said, oh, we can help you buy one. And then we're like, we'll just buy it for you. Right.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me, right? Just like make it easy on them, one less decision. Okay. I just wanted to check if people tend to have their own or their own path, or if you guys provide that.
Yeah, no,
As you guys start scaling more events, you should totally partner with Meta. Just become a distribution channel. You're selling at least one, if not multiple headsets per transaction. So
yeah, no, exactly. I think some of the weddings we do is like a Vision Pro crowd. And
that makes sense to me. And high fidelity, really luxury for high-end weddings. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think just the difference between like Meta and Apple, from my perspective, is Apple came in with this really price point that is like absurd, right? Who pays $4,000 for something off the bat, right? That doesn't even have a lot of like actual use, like things they can use it for. But they came in with the right messaging.
Yeah,
like it was your personal memories. It's like watch your kid, eating birthday cake, right? Like that resonates. Meta leans so heavily into like workout apps and
Gaming.
and I think that messaging was just like, yeah, that probably works, and their device is really good, right? They have a very powerful device at a very reasonable price point, right? And Apple doesn't. Yet more people are talking about Apple.
Do you guys tap into Apple's 3D immersive photos? Because like you said, like those memories were like a part of their main demo, and every non-XR person, which is a lot of your audience that I've talked to, that was one of their top 2 or 3 things that seems to resonate. Do you guys have that feature as something that you bundle in of like trying to capture some immersive 3D photos, or is that tied into your story at all?
We do photos. We take some photos as well. Not like more just like we'll take a couple just to have them. Where we're more interested is trying to kind of take 2D photos that people take on their phones and turn that into some sort of immersive or experience in an immersive way and connect with it. And I think this is something that the, sort of XR world will sort of struggle with, of like, how do you, when we go to user generated content, right? How do we take this stuff that we're capturing on our phones and make it usable in an immersive way. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
That's how we're going to scale. Because the bottleneck in our business right now is the capturing moment. We have a ton of control over that capturing moment at weddings because we're doing it ourselves. But in the future, it'll be 360 footage not captured by us. And then in the future after that, hopefully soon, will be 2D and 3D video and photos that using photogrammetry and 3D Gaussian splatting and neural radiance fields to recreate those images into three-dimensional environments that you can walk through, like Apple was demoing already.
Guys, I love this. I think you guys are stumbled onto something very valuable. I love the way that you're going about the building process. Like, again, your experience as founders and being around startups is really
slower than we'd like, but
it always is. It always is. And that's not even something I think we have time for. You mentioned at the beginning of the call, the downs of being a founder and breaking through that. I think there's almost a whole other conversation around just being a founder and creating a company that would be interesting with you guys. But again, I think it's super cool. I think anyone who's listening to this who has a wedding coming up or friends that are getting married, like maybe float this on their radar. It's pretty interesting. But before we hop off, anything you guys want to plug on where people can find you, and we'll make sure to throw some links down in the description.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to heart you when you were making a plug for us. Visit us at relivable.com, and you can fill out a form. We'd love to talk to anybody interested in talking shop with us, or if you've got a wedding or have any fun ideas. Like, we're always open to talking.
Connections at Meta.
Yeah. We'd love to figure out a way to have a closer relationship with really anybody that's in this space. I think, as what excites me, and it's also a limiting factor, you mentioned it earlier, is the biggest tech companies in the world are investing a ton of money into improving the hardware and the software, right? Like, so it's like, yeah, I'd love to go back to 2007 and be an app developer, right? And like, know what I know in 2024, right? And be like, okay, these are the apps we're going to build. And I think that's kind of what we're approaching, right? Over the next couple of years, Apple's going to come out with more reasonably priced headsets. Meta's going to keep getting better. Other companies are going to, kind of be more prominent in the space. And we'll have a couple of year head start, right, on how people are using this technology.
Yeah, completely agree. It's a new medium of communication, a new medium of content production. And I say it on the show all the time, but I think a 3D asset is going to be just as ubiquitous as a JPEG or a PDF at some point here. And it's getting to the place where even animated 3D objects are getting easier and easier. The whole pipeline is kind of getting more efficient, easier to do, more cost-effective to accomplish. But to your point, it's kind of like the beginning of developing iOS apps or creating websites. Like, we're kind of at the early days of it. So huge opportunity to find the right ideas to work on. Nick, was there anything that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, it's it. Just like, it's a completely new platform. So we have to just build for future and see ahead. And, there's been a couple of movies that have put this, Black Mirror and Reminiscent and all these other, Hollywood has thought about this. But I don't know how much, private business has. So we're honored to be tackling memories and to be at the forefront of that new industry and new platform.
Hell yeah. I love it, guys. Great to meet you. Thanks for sharing your story. And that's
thanks for having us.
I'm MetaRick.